That was just real. Hi, light switch. Hi, everybody. If everybody told us about this light switch, so I thought I would bring it out. But hello again from this wall, which, because it's still Florida, there's a hole in the roof that's shooting out hot air on me. This is the only wall we could shoot at. So just letting you know how my life is going right now. Studio is still under repair, so right now we're shooting like this still. Apparently a lot of people said like, oh, you know what? I don't really mind that. So I thought we would do another kind of informal episode. And this one about something that I wanted to make it a really like produced and like hyper researched episode, and then didn't have time or energy to do so. So I wanted to do an episode about Hamilton. I did a lot of research. I have been following Hamilton since it came out, have been listening to the music ever since, and so when it came out on Disney Plus, I was like, oh my god, we need to make a video about it, we need to talk about the filming of it, and how like some angles work and some don't. And then I watched it, I was like, most of the angles work. There's not much to say. And Alan and I have shot a bunch of like live videography. I've done like drone flying indoors for like concerts and stuff like that. Alan's been like running around like with a gimbal on stage shooting stuff, but we realized like there's not really too much we can talk about with Hamilton for that. So I just wanted to gush about the show for a little bit until I realized how much of the show itself is actually really good storytelling, but not historically accurate. Hamilton itself is actually far less ridiculous than real life actually was. There's a lot of stuff that happens at Hamilton that is interesting, and it has a perfect flow. And if you watch our Rise of Skywalker video, you'll know there's a pacing diagram, a diagram that people use to show the pace of a show, how interesting it goes up and then comes back down to some chill moments and then gets more intense and stuff like that. And the show follows that pacing diagram. And real life doesn't. I made a list of all of the moments in Hamilton that are historically accurate, but technically not. And the main thing about that is storytelling. Lin Manuel Miranda did such a good job, not only making history a musical and taking all of the moments and like ordering them in a way to fit a pacing diagram, but also to be entertaining and fit rhyme schemes and stuff like that in a way that is crazy. It's like Shakespearean, if even better. Okay, I might not want to make that comparison. Be like, this guy's better than Shakespeare, and he sung in Moana, so you know.
He sung in Moana.
He was in House. You know, he did a How I Met Your Mother episode. He did all of those things. Google it. I mean, I really love him. I love Lin Manuel Miranda. But the thing about Hamilton that I think is crazy is the fact that they fit historical moments to fit this pacing diagram. But okay, this is a moment I wanted to do. I can't do now because we don't have the data. I literally, just for a quick aside, I went through Hamilton and like paused every single time they said anything that could remotely be considered a historical fact, and I listed them out on a spreadsheet that I've showed to people who think I'm crazy because there are 390 entries in that spreadsheet of possible facts to history. And what I wanted to do for the episode was lay them all out and be like, this is the pacing diagram for Hamilton. But if we actually lay that on the way that happened in history, it would look like this, and then like move around those data points to how they would line up on the actual historical timeline. Sounds like a lot of work, right? Sounds like it would take someone weeks to do that if they did have the time. Guess who didn't? It's me. So really quick, I want to check in with our buddy behind the camera. Alan, how you feeling? How'd you like Hamilton? He just watched it for the first time a couple days ago.
When Hamilton first came out, the only exposure that I had from it was knowing that it came out, but also hearing everyone sing the songs, and that could drive somebody insane. That's how you create hatred against art. But I enjoyed it. I could see why a lot of people would be hyped about it. I can see why a lot of people would want to sing a lot of the amazing songs that they perform in there. The performance in general in it was amazing. Even in a stage play, there were still camera angles that worked in their favor. And just the blocking in general is amazing in it. I think it's a better 3 hours spent than The Irishman, if you ask me. I love The Irishman. It was a great movie. I love it. Don't attack me, all right? It's just, it did nothing new for me.
Speaking of attacking him, like, share, comment, subscribe. Before we get into it, I just want to say that please do. Please. Anyway, as we shill.
Hamilton would have subscribed.
Hamilton.
Right?
Yeah, he would, dude. Hamilton would have subscribed. He wouldn't have.
He wouldn't have.
As I'll tell you.
He would have slept with my wife instead. And given me $1,000.
$1,000. Spoilers for history, by the way. And this video might be longer than most of ours because I just have a lot to say. I'm pretty sure every single one of the facts that I have here has a source to them, so I spent a lot of time, and I thought that these were all interesting. If they're not, skip past certain ones, I guess. But I think they're interesting. So really quick, stay tuned. I recorded this later, but I wanted to include in the beginning. Aaron Burr is a real supervillain, and you need to watch through to the end for me to get to where in history, chronologically, he's literally a supervillain in the 1800s. It's a trip, so stay tuned for that. He's not the villain in your history because he shot Hamilton. There's like 8 other things. Anyway. So first of all, let's talk about when he meets all of his friends. So all the stuff that they talked about, like in the very, very beginning, talking about his like early life, that stuff's pretty fine. But when he meets all of the people, the major thing that's different, and the reason why Lin Manuel Miranda did this, is to have like 3 people in the beginning of the show and 3 people in the end of the show that are kind of surrounding him. In the beginning, there's Hercules Mulligan, John Lawrence, LaFayette, those are his 3 friends, and then Aaron Burr is kind of there throughout. And at the end, the same actors are James Madison, not Lafayette again.
It is Lafayette.
It's the same actor, but yeah, so it's James Madison, Jefferson, and then Aaron Burr's still there, but then the guy that played John Lawrence is now Phillip. So they kind of like transfer to these different characters who were his friends, now they're kind of his enemies and his son, I guess.
Which, if you have a Cro-Magnon brain like my own, you may get confused by that.
You might not recognize them immediately. Speaking of which, I didn't realize, and a bunch of my friends talked about it after we watched Hamilton, I didn't realize the guy that plays Aaron Burr has a lisp, like, at all. That appears nowhere in the actual recordings. So when we watched it, like, we were just like, I don't want to sound mean, but I'm really distracted. So one major thing, and we'll get into this a bunch, and I don't mean to like harp on this point, but like a bunch of them had slaves, just so you know. Like that was a thing at the time.
They all did.
They all did, and it's not great. One thing that Hamilton says, like in the show, he says that he's a manumission abolitionist. So manumission means that they voluntarily would release their enslaved people, and that was a trend that people were starting to do at the time. Abolitionist means abolishing slavery. So historians say that he was a manumissionist, believed in manumission at the time, but he was not an abolitionist. Like, historians are just like, okay, we might be going a little bit far with that. So much so that later on in the show, they don't mention slavery at all, because at that time, he was pretty complicit in the entire thing of slavery. So he believed in letting them go, not in abolishing slavery. When he meets Hercules Mulligan, all 3 of them are just hanging out. They're all having a beer, you know, like they do. No, Hercules Mulligan probably never met John Lawrence and Lafayette. Like, there's no evidence, apparently, from what I read, that he would have met either of them. Hamilton and Hercules Mulligan were roommates when he moved to New York City and was studying and doing all of the early stuff that he was doing. That's how they met, and then Hercules Mulligan became a spy. And so he was off doing spy stuff and didn't really know any of these 2 other people, because the 2 of them, John Lawrence and Lafayette, Hamilton knew from actually fighting in the Revolutionary War. So there's no reason why all 3 of them would be there at the same time. So he actually met John Lawrence in 1777 when they were all fighting. And so at the very least, he says, apparently... This is an interesting thing about history that people have said, is that apparently Hamilton was really, 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 really good friends with John Lawrence, to the point where a bunch of historians are just like, he might have had a crush. People have said the word crush when I was Googling it. I was like, okay, that's a weird thing to include in there.
It's a bromance. There's a difference.
Yeah, and that's what I thought, but a lot of them were like implying weird things about the right. I don't know. But regardless, apparently so much so that when John Lawrence actually does die, apparently Hamilton was never that close with another human being in his entire life. That, like, when they say that they're best friends, they are close friends. I don't know what degree historians have agreed on that, but that was a cool thing that I thought they put in there. Now, Lafayette is a straight badass. Like, when it came to the Revolutionary War, he was 19 when all that stuff happens. Like, at the beginning when he meets Hamilton and all that early stuff, he was 19, and that's also when he got shot in the leg and survived and went on to talk to the French and ask them to get guns and ships. And apparently, when he was 24, he actually sent the ask to France in 1781 for the Battle of Yorktown. And Hamilton was the one that helped him kind of translate and write the manuscript to send over to France. So I thought that was a cool thing, that they kind of worked together to even do that. Now for where he meets Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr actually finished his studies in 1773. In Non-Stop, the song Non-Stop, they say after the war he went back to New York and finished up his studies. They both say that, I think. Burr already finished his studies. Hamilton did go back and he passed the bar in 1782. So Hamilton did need to go back and learn to be an attorney, but Burr had already finished all of his studies and he was practicing law from 74 to 75. Then the revolution happens. And Hamilton and him didn't meet at a bar the same way. Like, all four of them didn't just meet. Apparently, there's no proof of when they met. It was assumed that they met around 74, 75 because they had a mutual friend named William Livingston. Everything I just said those past couple of minutes, Lin Manuel Miranda condensed into 2 seconds of him walking into a bar and meeting all four of these people. And that's what we're going to get into, is the fact that, like, for him to do all this would be so boring. Like, and it would take 6 hours. He compartmentalized all of history to be interesting and be exciting to watch the flow of it. Him meeting Eliza, he didn't actually meet his wife, like, at a ball and all that stuff. He actually went to go negotiate with Phillip Schuyler, who was a general and a war hero early on, who then retired, and on Washington's behalf was talking to Phillip Schuyler saying, like, hey, if you could help us, that would be dope. That was in 1778. That's when he first met Eliza. But then they kind of knew each other a little bit until 1780, when she was sent to live with her Aunt Gertrude. She had an actual Aunt Gertrude. When I read that, I'm like, that can't be real. But her actual aunt's name was Gertrude, and she was in Morristown, New Jersey. Hamilton also happened to be stationed there, and that's when he met her again and talked to her, and they started the courtship. The thing that's really adorable about all that is the fact that on his way back, he was so excited about it, that on his way back to headquarters, he forgot the password, and they couldn't let him in, because he was just so happy. I think that's really cute. So that's different than having a winter's ball. Oh yeah, not cool thing, though. Phillip Schuyler, his big thing was owning slaves. So he had like 30 slaves at 2 different mansions. Anyway, moving on. And I forgot about this. Phillip Schuyler had 15 children. When Angelica says, like, I'm the oldest, I have to get married and, like, have a really profitable husband that's super rich. At the time, Phillip Schuyler already had sons. She didn't need to do that. And we'll get into that later when we talk about Angelica. So he actually had 15 children. 7 of them only actually lived past 10 years old. One in particular that I wanted to mention, because when I was Googling this, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. This is conjecture. I have no source on this. But apparently he had 3 children named John Bradstreet Schuyler. And the reason why he had 3 of them is because they kept dying. One of them was born and then within a year died, and then another one was born and then within a year died. Then he had a third one who actually lived to be older. But on Wikipedia, you can see that on the Wikipedia page. It's ridiculous to look at. I'm not sure if that's historically accurate. That's why they were all named that. But that's there. Now for Angelica. So now the big thing about Angelica that's interesting is that in the play, they make it out to be that they have this like affair and all this stuff. Historians have really debated about that, if they actually were like having an affair or anything like that, if Hamilton and her actually had some salacious stuff going on. And a lot of people say they didn't, because it's usually in letters. That's all that you can like see this kind of relationship going. They say that, oh, there's the winter's ball and they met each other and all this stuff. That didn't really happen. He actually didn't meet Angelica until after Angelica was married. Angelica got married in 1777 to a guy named John Baker Church. She was so in love with him, or they were so in love together, that they wouldn't eloped without their family's blessing. Like, they didn't even have like a straight up marriage. And that was like really big. They were like, what is wrong with you two? But she already had married rich, like John Broadchurch or Brad Baker? John Baker Church. Jeez, so many names in this.
Like it's history.
It's like
something.
history. It's like there was a bunch of human beings that lived on this earth. But John Baker Church was already kind of like on his way to being well known. So much so that John Baker Church actually even dueled with Aaron Burr in 1799 because people didn't like Burr. And fun fact, Church's guns were actually the exact guns that that Hamilton and Burr used during that duel.
Wait, what was that?
The guns that Angelica's husband had, that he used to fight Burr in 1799, are the same guns that Hamilton and Burr used during their duel in 1804 when Hamilton dies. So it's interesting.
Unlucky pair of guns right there.
Right? But it's really interesting that like this other ulterior character was left out because it ruins the fact that he was there and he also didn't like Burr, and he also was married to Angelica Schuyler. So I think that Lin Manuel Miranda tried to put Hamilton and him together. This guy was also an educated person. He also didn't like Burr. He also dueled Burr. So if we kind of put them together, it does make sense. That's me conjecting. I don't know. Lin Manuel Miranda, he's a genius. I already said so. And yeah, they were likely friends, Angelica and Hamilton, because a lot of the stuff that they wrote to each other was just kind of playful. In particular, they were talking about in the play, and it's like this emotional moment when Angelica's like, you moved a comma at the end, and it said that I'm your dearest, but my sister's supposed to be your dearest, and I don't know about these feelings. And the thing that's funny about this is that that wasn't even her that wrote that. Hamilton wrote that in a letter to her. So she wrote something that said, my dearest Hamilton. Like, I have the quote here, I'll leave it in the comments, but he's basically just like, I don't know, you're kind of playing with my heart here, sis. Like, you're saying this stuff.
Stop!
And it's like playful. So that's the way I read it.
No, you hang up first. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the thing, is that like throughout their kind of talking together, they were friends. And it seemed like they were friends. To me, in history, they actually could have been doing something behind the scenes, but a lot of people have said that Hamilton is a fan fiction about these historical characters. And that in particular is the main reason people say that. They might not have actually had anything beyond a good friendship. And the last thing people have mentioned is like, well, why isn't Peggy Schuyler in the rest of the show? Where did she go? Well, the same actress had to go play Mariah Reynolds, but also the fact that she died. Not too many people live to be super old, and she actually died in 1801. Around the same time that the end of the show is happening, she was already dead. That was a moment that like I listened to the first Schuyler Sisters song and was like, this is super cool, where's Peggy? And then I was like, oh, I Googled it, and now I'm sad. Now, George Washington. The meeting of George Washington and the communication with George Washington is another like dramatized cool moment that packs in like 8 different things. So not only does Aaron Burr meet George Washington first, but he also goes in with the smugness about being like, hey, I can give you some tips about being a good general, you know. And then Washington's like, can you get out of here? I need to talk to Hamilton, who I potentially haven't talked to before. When in reality, Washington knew about Hamilton because Hamilton was basically like fighting alongside him from a different platoon. In particular, in 1975, Washington had already met Hamilton because he was inspecting that platoon. When they say that Hamilton said, hey, let's steal their cannons, that was actually Captain John Lamb told his platoon to do that. That wasn't like his idea that he's like, yo, let's steal their cannons. And then Washington's like, I heard you stole cannons. You're my right-hand man. No, this was other stuff that people told them to do. But the actual main reason why Washington did want to bring Hamilton on was because there were 2 battles where they were trying to leave Manhattan and go uptown, like go to Trenton and Princeton. And on the way, Hamilton and his platoon stopped and returned fire so that Washington and everybody else could get out. That's the main reason why like everybody was like, yo, Hamilton's pretty dope. This guy's really young, but he looks awesome. Like he's really cool and he's helping us get out of here. And then so when they got to Princeton, he talked with Washington and Washington's like, I like you. Let's meet up. Let's have a beer. Let's chill out. And that's when they actually joined together. Yeah, and they build up this whole conversation about how like Burr and Washington are kind of adversaries, as well as like Burr and Hamilton just kind of exist at the same time. But actually Burr did some intelligence reconnaissance in 1779, or he ran some intelligence meetings with other members of, I think it was the Continental Generals in 1779. So he actually was doing stuff for Washington. It wasn't like Washington saw him and he's just like, you like to retreat. This is stupid. I don't like you. They build up Burr to be this kind of coward. And in history, that's not completely wrong or right, because he actually did become a war hero from retreating. In 1777, Burr actually saw that there were some Manhattan-based British troops that were coming in by water and then retreated, saving everyone's life. Like through his vigilance of noticing what was happening and making the decision, he actually saved a lot of people's lives and that way became a war hero. So he was liked for the reason that they kind of mock him. He's like, hey, I admire how you're firing on the British from a distance. Burr actually did end up helping by retreating. So that's why I find it interesting, is they in the show kind of twist it to be something kind of cowardly. And one more thing about Washington that is not super great, and we've been talking about throughout, is that when it came to slavery, he was number 1 as well. He had a lot of slaves.
He was number 1.
He was number 1.
No. It's awful.
Mount Vernon had like,
Cut that out.
Mount Vernon had 317 slaves by the time he died. He did something that no other founding father apparently did, which was like a manumission thing, where he said, release my slaves upon my death, just enough that can help Martha, my wife, until she dies. And she ended up also releasing the rest of those slaves. Some have speculated, so this is all speculation. I'm going to put a source, but at the same time understand that this is all still everybody thinking about the politics behind it. At the time, they were thinking it was a pressure move. It could go either way, but that is something that he included in his will. Is like, hey, there's a lot of slaves here. Please release them upon my death, and just make sure there's enough for Martha to be taken care of before she dies.
Oh my god.
So here's the interesting stuff, and here's where Lin Manuel Miranda kind of warps time to fit, where it comes to the Charles Lee Duel, where John Lawrence and Charles Lee duel. Hamilton was the second to John Lawrence, but Charles Lee's second was not Aaron Burr. And this is where he kind of twists time in an interesting way, because it wouldn't have really made sense for him to like kind of move these two separate moments. Charles Lee's second was actually a guy named Major Edwards, but the reason why they put Burr here is to solidify the fact that Burr thinks that duels are dumb. The reason why he thinks that is because later on, when the entire Reynolds Pamphlet stuff happens, Burr was actually the second to a guy named Monroe. We'll get into this with the Reynolds Pamphlet, but just so you understand, Monroe and Hamilton end up getting into a duel over the leaked information about Mariah Reynolds. Monroe's second was Aaron Burr, and then Aaron Burr talks to Hamilton and says like, hey, this is stupid. You shouldn't, the information's already out. You shouldn't do this. And Hamilton's like, fine. So by pulling that over into the first act in the entire first section of the play, we solidify the fact that Aaron Burr thinks that duels are dumb. That actual historical moment didn't happen until way later in their lives. And one other fun thing is that the 10 duel commandments are based off of Biggie Smalls' 10 crack commandments, but there were actually 25 rules when it came to dueling that were called the Code Duelio.
Good song, by the way.
He's a really good
10
song.
cracks commandments.
Yeah, right?
No, it's really good. I actually like it.
Yeah, exactly. That's why like there are fun little moments that like he throws in from rap. Like if you don't know, now you know.
Now you know, yeah.
So yeah, they did it to fit. So there were 25 rules. They made them 10 because it's so much better. He rewrote them to be 10. Now you can actually remember what they are because there's only 10 of them in a song. And that also fits in with the motif for Phillip when he dies because he counts to 9. It's great. Google music theory. So that was everything from Act 1. But in Act 2, we have some really interesting stuff that like adds a little bit of spice to what happens. And something I want to hammer home is that everything that happens in the play isn't technically wrong. There's some fanficky elements. These moments did happen. They just didn't happen in this weird jumbly way. And there's some stuff that he omits, like this one, which is the Constitutional Convention, where he talks to everybody about what he thinks the Constitution should be like. And they say, bright young man, who the F is this? That's because they say who the F is this because he got up and talked about what he thought like a good constitution should be like. And he just quoted the British system. And they're like, we just left that. What are you talking about? Like, why would we do that? And he called it the best in the world. He said that the British system of government was the best in the world. They're like, what are you talking about? So this is a direct quote from the article. Under Hamilton's system, senators and a national governor, so a national governor instead of a monarch, would be chosen by special electors and would serve for life. Kind of like a king does. People were just like, is he a monarchist? Like, what are we doing? That's exactly what we left. So he actually, Hamilton was cited saying, I regret what I said there. That's the interesting thing is that like he kind of said some weird stuff when he went to the Constitutional Convention, but they still revered him as like, okay, this guy's kind of eloquent with what he's talking about. Another fun footnote is when they talk about the Federalist Papers. So the Federalist Papers were, I think they said there were 85 different essays that were written over like a year and some change. And one person that they cite that we don't talk about for the rest of the play is John Jay. And John Jay was another one of the people that wrote 5 of the Federalist Papers. And then he got sick and they said he couldn't write anymore. He did get sick. And then he got better, and then he got hit in the head with a brick. And that's why he couldn't write anymore. Apparently there was a riot in March of 1788, and the Federalist Papers were published in May. So March to May, he couldn't fill in that time to do more Federalist Papers, but his wife was cited in saying that he got hit so bad that it looked like he had 2 holes in his head. So that's why he's no longer in the play. Moving on to the big names. So Jefferson. Jefferson as a human being in this play is like really fun and flamboyant and like exciting to listen to and all this stuff. In real life, he wasn't at all. He apparently was very shy and didn't really like talking to people at all. Like he was just really to himself. So much so that he didn't give his addresses. Like his inauguration speech, he only gave 2 speeches in the, I think it was 7 years or 8 years that he was in office. He only gave 2 speeches. The others he wrote and sent them out. Like as a mass email, he sent out his messages. That's how reserved of a human being he was. So if you watch this and think, man, dude, this guy is so cool. He was cool in his writing. His writing was very interesting. And that's what their characters are based off of, the way that they wrote. But the way that he actually acted was really reserved to the point where people were just like, he's kind of a dick. Like, I don't like that guy. But it's mostly because he was just very introverted and he didn't really know how to like deal with people. And another funny footnote is that in the song Washington on Your Side, Jefferson says, we slap each other in the paper and don't print retractions. Well, the person that was doing that slapping was mostly Jefferson. He established his own paper called the National Gazette and used it to defame the crap out of John Adams. In the paper, he would just write all of these terrible things about John Adams, and then John Adams would write these things back. Granted, they both used to be like best friends. And then there was this entire turmoil point where they both were running for president and then just started slandering each other. And Jefferson actually won, allegedly, because in the National Gazette, he said that John Adams wanted to go to war with France. And that wasn't true. So that's cited as one of the reasons why Jefferson became president, because he lied in his own paper about John Adams. And when they say John Adams shit the bed, they weren't technically lying. The Adams administration was kind of an issue because nobody really had confidence in him. People were ridiculing him so much that he tried to actually put into law something that said that it was illegal to mock the president of the United States. He was so fed up with it that he's like, I'm gonna write this down. I need to make sure that there's a reason why people won't do this anymore to me. And this brings us to the Reynolds Pamphlet. So the Reynolds Pamphlet is a big thing in the play. It's like this big historical moment. But the thing that's interesting about it to me is how it's slightly different. If you actually read it, Hamilton comes off as this really paranoid, crazy person. It's actually really funny to read, where he's just like, I was just minding my own business, and then this group of people just came after me, little old me, Hamilton. And he even says that he's like, I've done nothing in my past, nothing that's bad, and I don't know why they would be so mean to me all of a sudden. And he actually quotes saying, without a single man who being known to be friendly to me, like, oh, woe is me, the 15 people that were investigating me for embezzling aren't my friends. Boo-hoo. In the play, they show it to be Aaron Burr, James Madison, and Jefferson that were the people that confront him about it. When in reality, they might have been one of those 15 people that were not friendly to him. The people that actually did end up talking to him, the 3 people, were a guy named Muhlenberg, Monroe, and Venable. Those apparently were the 3 people that actually knew what happened with the Reynolds pamphlet. And the reason why it became an issue, and like I said before, Hamilton ended up dueling Monroe and Burr was the second, is because Hamilton told all this stuff just to Monroe. But a guy named James Callender wrote it into a paper saying that
Hamilton did some adultery, ooh.
And he basically was like the TMZ of the time. Google James Callender. He wrote some crazy shit at the time. But he wrote this thing about Hamilton, and Hamilton's like, hey, Monroe, you're the only guy that I talked to about this. Monroe's like, I didn't leak it. You kind of said it to everybody. Because of what Callender wrote in the paper, that's why Hamilton actually wrote the Reynolds pamphlet. Yeah, Google James Callender. He wrote some ridiculous stuff at the time. But Hamilton in the paper was being charged with being an adulterer and an embezzler. He's like, I'd rather just be charged with being an adulterer. So the reason why he wrote the Reynolds pamphlet was because there was already this hit piece out. And he's like, hey, whoa, hey. I only slept with a lady. I didn't steal this money. I just gave it to her husband. What a stupid. And apparently, according to, there was a drunk history with Lin Manuel Miranda, but apparently a bunch of his friends were just like, don't do this? You don't need to write this Reynolds pamphlet. He's like, no, dog, it's going to be great. And a small thing about James Reynolds is that James Reynolds left his wife for a little bit. And that's when Hamilton and Maria Reynolds got together. And then he was still sleeping with her when James Reynolds kind of came back into her life. And Maria said like, hey, my husband who's back in my life is kind of like down on his luck. Could you talk to him? So Hamilton, while still banging his wife, tried to give him like career advice. And so he gave him a talk. He's like, hey, you should do these things to better yourself. And then James Reynolds found out and was just like, are you serious? You're sleeping with my wife while actually also still talking to me? I want to duel you. All the stuff about the money and him being sent a letter saying, dear sir, I hope this letter finds you in good health and in a prosperous enough position to put wealth in the pockets of people like me, down on my luck. You see, that was my wife who you were trying to He didn't actually write that letter. He just wrote Hamilton saying, hey, I'm going to duel you. I know you've been banging my wife, even though we know each other. What the hell, dude? Hamilton kind of ignored that for a little bit, and then the proposition of money then came up. And something that Lin Manuel Miranda says in the Drunk History part of it is that it reads like a Dear Penthouse letter. It reads like a legal document. Like Hamilton's on some next level. Like, I don't even know how he did this. It's all written so convoluted. He barely mentions Maria Reynolds. Like, he barely mentions the entire adultery. He's just like, look at all these people that are after me. Me, this amazing man who just so happened to cheat on my wife. You know, it's no big deal. But look at all these people. They're all bad and I'm not bad. And he like tries to justify it and it's really ridiculous. He's literally such a conspiracy theorist that the last paragraph is calling out, hey, whoever talk to James Reynolds, you're a piece of shit. I hate you. You're mother. Come find me. And that's when he actually duels Monroe because he assumes it was Monroe who did that, which led to the fact that Aaron Burr was just like, why are you guys dueling? This is stupid. Stop dueling. I'm against dueling, even though I'm going to kill Hamilton. And the last thing that I wanted to mention about the Reynolds pamphlet is the fact that it's the reason why he and his wife become estranged. They kind of like separate, and the amazing song Burn comes out of it, which is the best breakup song I've ever heard. But actually, they ended up getting back together before the birth of his 7th child, which was in 1799. So they were back together relatively soon. Like, honestly, after all of that. But the main reason why 1799 is such an important date is that Philip died at 1802. They were back together, living together, and a little bit happier than they were before Philip died. So Philip dying wasn't the reason that they got back together and moved. But they were already back together before Philip died. So by moving those around, it makes for a better play, but that's not actually how it happened in real life. A funny thing about Philip's death, so he went and did this duel, all of that stuff is true, but during the duel, he did the gun shoot in the air, which is actually called a del-up. It's a French move. When you shoot in the air, the other guy, if they shoot you, they basically were trying to kill you, which is, there's no honor in that. So when he shoots his gun up in the air, George Eaker like takes out his gun and they're about to shoot, and they literally just have a moment of just like, for like a straight whole minute. Apparently, like, they literally stopped and did nothing, and like, Philip's just like, all right, and then he shot him. So if you thought George Eaker was a bad guy, he literally was just sitting there just like, I guess I'm gonna do it. We came all this way. I might as well. So now for the last thing that I want to talk about, which was the election of 1800. This is the problem with the play, is the fact that they have to cram all this stuff together. So in it, they say it's up to the delegates, now it's up to Hamilton, like it's up to the voters, delegates, and Hamilton. What actually happened was the election of 1800 was between Jefferson and Aaron Burr, but apparently the delegates kept voting 50-50 between the two of them. They kept voting 50-50 34 times. 34 times they did a recount and kept re-voting for either Jefferson or Burr, and they could not settle on one. And they make it sound like Hamilton gave this big speech which swayed everybody to vote for Jefferson, but the entire time Hamilton was actually against Burr because of his supervillain stuff. We're getting there, we're almost there. He voted against Burr the entire time. He was campaigning saying, this guy's a piece of shit, don't vote for him, don't vote for him, he's a piece of shit, vote for Jefferson. I don't like Jefferson, but he's better than this piece of shit. The actual person that changed everything was still a Federalist, but his name was James Bayard, and he actually had some delegate votes that he was like, hey, I'm going to vote for Jefferson, and that's what swayed everybody to then vote for Jefferson. So it wasn't like Hamilton gave one speech and everybody's like, you know what, he's right. Let's all vote for Jefferson. And that wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back. That wasn't the reason why Burr wanted to... I just remembered it. It's so bullshit. Sorry.
Burn his wooden pipe.
Yeah, dude. Oh, we're good. Okay, yeah. So that's not the reason why Burr wanted to fight Hamilton and do the duel. The reason why Hamilton hated Burr so much, and he didn't just say, oh, Jefferson has beliefs, Burr has none. No, he'd been campaigning forever against Burr because in 1795, Burr actually started what was called the Manhattan Water Company. And some people might already know about this, that there was a very big problem at the time that 45 people died of yellow fever. So we're like, we need to do something about this. The water's literally toxic and stagnant. So Burr said, hey, let's have this water company that'll bring in fresh water and it'll cure people of this. We won't have this disease anymore. And everyone was like, hip hip hooray. Hamilton was even like, yeah, let's do this. Like, I don't want people to keep dying. So Burr had all this idea for a water company, but then in the last second, he wrote in a clause that said any extra money that the water company has, they can do whatever they want with it. So what he ended up doing was converting it into a bank. All of that extra money went into a bank that was fronted by the water company. So he ended up starting one of the first banks, which Hamilton had been trying to do forever. Burr sidestepped the entire process by saying like, we need water, don't we? And in the background, he's like, I'm gonna make so much money. It wouldn't have been an issue if it wasn't for the fact that the Manhattan Water Company was hot garbage. To take every cost-cutting measure, used wooden pipes for water that would freeze over and would be basically useless.
It turned to much after a month.
Yeah, like... So that was the first reason why he's a supervillain, and Hamilton's like, how can you not hate this guy? Literally in the election of 1800, where everybody's voting for either Burr or Jefferson, Hamilton's like, do you not remember 2 years ago when he killed 1,000 people because of the yellow fever? So that was supervillain move number 1. Supervillain move number 2, which is the big one, doesn't happen until after Hamilton's death. So let's address Hamilton's death. They make it seem like Hamilton talked in front of Congress and the delegates and everybody and said like, Jefferson has beliefs, Burr has none, you should vote for Jefferson. That's not really what happened. The entire time he was campaigning against Burr, but the reason why this is actually technically true is because when Burr left office in 1804 and was no longer the vice president, then he tried to run for governor of New York. And that's when Hamilton went ham and was like, stop voting for this guy. Stop doing it. And that's when Burr said, dude, why are you so mad? Bro, you mad, bro?
Friends, why are you so mad at me?
Why are you so mad? He made troll face.
Stop!
And then Hamilton ended up writing those letters. They had the talk back and forth.
Have a glass of water.
Have a glass. You're not you when you're hungry.
You're not you when you're thirsty. Here, have some wood water.
Have this wood water with yellow fever in it. So the reason why they actually had that duel was because Hamilton was saying, this guy's a supervillain. Stop supporting him. And then Burr's just like, I don't know what's your problem. Let's duel. And then apparently, and I need to find the source for this, apparently after the duel, when Burr shot Hamilton and killed him, he didn't mean to, allegedly. So in the streets afterwards, when they say there was wailing in the streets, he apparently was the one wailing in the streets. Apparently he was hysterical and was just walking from in the streets crying, blubbering about how he shot his best friend. So that makes it even more tragic, but not too tragic, because Burr goes on to be the worst human being. So after blubbering in the streets, Hamilton's words actually did ring true, and nobody really liked Burr after that. So what he ended up doing was going southwest in kind of the continental United States, and he tried to establish his own country. He actually, and I don't know what this, I read somewhere that there was this cabal of people that were trying to start a new nation, but he went and tried to conquer new land to make his own other America. People caught wind of that and then dragged him back to New York, or back to, I think at the time it was Washington, D.C., and he was on trial for treason. Jefferson, who had a second term, and his vice president was George Clinton as vice president, they had a trial for him and said, like, you tried to undo what we did. Literally, you were there. You tried to establish your own nation. This isn't cool. You're being tried for treason. And the judge voted against it. He was voted not guilty in a controversial move. But he was then forever labeled the treasonous Aaron Burr who poisoned the water supply and ruined everything. And that's why I love the point where he says, now I'm the villain in your history. Like, that was the only thing. He shot Hamilton and now people don't like him. No, he poisoned water supply and tried to start his own competing country where we are that he fought for. That was the biggest thing that I thought was really interesting about Hamilton, is the fact that Aaron Burr is supposed to be the sympathetic character that we really do enjoy throughout the beginning of the show. So when he turns at the end, it's tragic. But in real life, he was just a piece of shit. So I don't know how long this video is actually going to be when I edit it down, but I appreciate it if you've stayed with us, because I thought that was the interesting part about Hamilton. Instead of fitting those events that I laid out in the order that they happened, he took out the ones that are really hard to explain and then streamlined it. Hercules, Mulligan, and all of his friends all just met in a tavern, and that's how they met each other. And then we proceed to how they fulfilled their duties during the war, and then in Act 2, we just go on to about... we just give some lip service to the ridiculous stuff that happened, like calling out people in the papers. Google James Callender. He was a guy. He was crazy. And then the entire supervillain nature of Aaron Burr and how sleazy he was. So by massaging all of that together, they kind of make history into its own little story, its own little fan fiction. It's not really fake what happens in Hamilton. Like, all those moments did happen. They just either happened in a different order or with different people. We don't really know how Hamilton and Aaron Burr and all those people really were back then. And spoiler alert, Aaron Burr wasn't black. None of those characters...
What? What?
I'm gonna need to talk Alan down from
George Washington?
No, he wasn't that shade. I'm sorry.
Hamilton?
I'm sorry, he wasn't Lin Manuel Miranda. He was still
The
attractive.
King of England?
He was white.
Oh.
And that's not a bad thing. I mean, I think that this is really good. And some of the cast members have even said that they now feel like they have a part of history and that they've actually impacted history in a way, and that they can kind of reclaim it because all of them were slave owners. I already said this, which is not good. And now we're kind of reclaiming some of those impressive historical moments and packaging them in a way that we can still feel proud about them. Even the fact that I just listed out all the ways that Hamilton isn't technically historically accurate, that doesn't mean that it's not amazing. I mean, Hamilton's probably one of my favorite plays of all time, if not my favorite. I quote it all the time, and I can in the comments, literally write down, is just like, I bet you can't say this. I literally, for an audition for one of the silly shows that we do, I did the entire cabinet rap battle. I know literally all of it. Here, quiz me, Alan, quiz me about a thing.
What is some of the points that Hamilton makes against Jefferson.
Okay, Hamilton says, Thomas, that was a real nice declaration. Welcome to the present. We're running a real nation. Would you like to join us or stay mellow doing whatever the hell it is you do in Monticello? If we assume the debts, the union gets a new line of credit, a financial diuretic. How do you not get it? If we're aggressive and competitive, the union gets a boost. You'd rather give it a sedative. A civics lesson from a slaver. Hey, neighbor, your debts are paid because you don't pay for labor. We plant seeds in the South. We create and keep ranting. We know who's really doing the planting. Another thing, Mr. Age of Enlightenment, don't lecture me about the war, you didn't fight in it. You think I'm frightened of you, man, we almost died in the trench while you were off getting high with the French. Thomas Jefferson, always hesitant with the president, reticent, there isn't a plan he doesn't jettison. Madison, you mad as a hatter, so deck your medicine. You in worse shape than the national denizen. Sitting there useless as two shits. Hey, turn around, bend over, I'll show you where my shoe fits.
Everyone like, comment, and subscribe if you love the fact that he memorized that entire thing.
Also, James Madison apparently took Mercury. That's why he said mad as a hatter. James Madison went crazy near the end of his life. But yeah, so, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. I hope you liked my mad ramblings. Hopefully I edited this to not be terrible. I appreciate it if you guys understand that we're still just trying to do some fun stuff while we get over the fact that our entire livelihood is being under construction. So, if you like this episode, give it a like. If you didn't, give it a dislike. Consider subscribing. Leave us a comment. What was your favorite fact that I mentioned, if they make any sense?
What's your favorite thing in Hamilton in general?
Actually, yeah. Tell us your favorite part about Hamilton.
Mine was the blocking. I really like the blocking. I like the dances that they did. A lot of it looks extremely difficult, and the fact that they were able to time it nice and do everything is beautiful. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, actually, the song Satisfied, they actually do the blocking from the earlier song where Eliza meets Hamilton backwards. Like, literally, when she says rewind, they're literally redoing their moves backwards. Ask me for more fun facts in the comments about Hamilton. I know way too many, and this is probably the only Hamilton video we'll ever do. So, thank you for watching, and have a good day. I'm so hot here. I've been sweating. That's the guy from Mindhunters, that actor.
Oh, Brian, I'm in Hamilton, Brian.